And now, at this time, we're going to have Mr. Bryan Kindred, President and CEO of DCH Health Systems since June of 1996. And I could only imagine in that current role in 2020, it's been all new, and he's probably had to learn how to go from the bottom of the pool. Here's Mr. Bryan Kindred.
Thank you, sir. Very much. Well, again, I want to thank Alabama One for the opportunity to speak to you today. I'm humbled. I'm going to have a little bit different proposition for you as I talk. But what I'm going to do is talk to you about our challenges and some of the issues that we have dealt with at the hospital. So if you'll go to that next slide. So you might wonder why I have pictures of neckties up there. And so several of us have them on here today, and I'll come back to that at the end and explain it, but I'm going to connect it to my conversation. So the next slide is a picture of the hospital, and I suspect many of you that are on this today know that we have 3 hospitals, 2 here in Tuscaloosa County, 1 in Fayette, and we have a long-term care facility in Fayette. And so, again, I'm going to talk to you about our year. Our financial year starts in October, and so I'm going to talk to you about the last 12 months or so. Our budget annually is about $550 million, so it's not a small operation. So go to the next slide, if you would, please. I'm going to talk to you about the day I'll never forget. I feel comfortable saying this in the group that I'm in now. I had just come back to work. That was my first day back at work after my father had passed away. And so as I was coming into the office, I said, God, you need to provide me, some distraction today because of what all I'd been dealing with. And so I walked into work, and as you can see on this slide, we had a ransomware attack on our hospital. And what that really means is somebody outside of the country locks down all of your computer information, and they basically render you cannot do the work that you need to do. And so that's where we were. And I'll kind of take you through our year, but that's how our year started. We started with that event. And so what that forced us to do was to go back to paper. So what we do daily is we input data into computers, and we use that information from those computers. Well, we had to go back to paper, and it was quite an ordeal, something we had not anticipated, obviously, so we had to go buy paper. We bought up all the paper in town. We bought every box of paper in town, and it still wasn't enough. So we obviously didn't anticipate what was happening to us, but nonetheless, we had to go back to paper. So that was one of the big, obviously a pretty big issue. I'll come back to that in just a moment. Here's another issue that we had to deal with. So COVID-19 struck early quarter of 2020, and so it was all new to us. We didn't really know what was about to occur, and I'll tell you more about that as we move along here. But here are our vinyl tents that we had to erect pretty quickly to do testing. And this was our first iteration of tents. This picture that you see here was right after it had been re-erected, after we had some wind in Tuscaloosa. And I think we found some of the tents down on the practice field and one at the baseball and inside the baseball stadium. So this was this is a picture right after we had put them back together. So again, we thought this was going to be temporary. You never know what's going to come your way, and so if you go to the next slide, you'll see now that if you go down there, drive past the tent, you'll see we're erecting a building now, because we anticipate this being with us for some time. And I'm sure somebody will ask me the question today, well, how long is this going to last? I can go ahead and answer that. I have absolutely no idea. I'll give you some thoughts about that, but we're preparing for this to be with us for a while. What that means yet, I'm not quite sure. We're trying to learn and adapt as we move along. So we're getting prepared for the winter, as you might imagine. When we started this in the last spring, the weather was nice, and other than the days where we've had rain, we've been able to operate in these vinyl tents, but now we're going to have some structure to do this properly with our patients. So I'm sure we'll come up with a way to repurpose this building after COVID is over, if it in fact goes away. The other thing I want to mention just briefly about the ransomware, after we went through that horrendous situation, and the question is always asked, well, did you pay a ransom? Well, this is how it works. The only way you get your information back so you can take care of patients is you pay the ransom. So we're still involved. We still have some legal issues that we're dealing with, so I can't answer a whole lot of specific questions about that. But yes, the ransom was paid by our insurance. So if you don't have cyber insurance, you probably ought to be thinking about it, because these guys are out there and they are ruthless. And so the last thing that we brought back up was our email traffic. And I have to admit, I kind of liked it because I didn't have all these emails popping up that I was having to deal with daily. But we did finally bring it back up. But in the interim, we had lots of face-to-face meetings. Now, you can imagine how we had to do that in big rooms, people spread out, and so it was cumbersome and it didn't work very well. And so out of that, we came up with a way to communicate, and our community, by the way, was asking for some of this communication. So the next slide, please. So what you see here are this is a daily update that comes out from from the hospital, and it talks about how many positive patients are in the hospital, how many are in the ICU, how many are on ventilators, how many are on BiPAP or breathing apparatuses. And so that was the information that our community wanted. They wanted to know more, and so it was a little uncomfortable at first. We thought, well, maybe we ought not be doing that, and then finally we said, yeah, we need to be giving that information out routinely to our community so they can be comfortable with what we're doing and how we're attacking this. So what you see there, if you look, you'll see that top, the top line, that top graph. Today we have 42 positive patients in our hospitals. 2 weeks ago, it was 71, and the highest we were at 109. So that's when we were at 109. I needed all you guys to come back and give me some encouraging words, because I was about ready to run. It was quite an ordeal. If you would go to the next slide there. So in the midst of this, we started evaluating, well, we need to really look at how we communicate, both internally and externally. And we started with our website, and we redid it. And so in the midst of all the chaos that I've been talking about, we embarked on changing our website. We embarked on changing our brand, and maybe you have seen some of those in our community. Also, we changed the way we handled social media. And so all of those were changes. Another big change, I don't really have a slide on this, but I want to just mention it. One of the things that's terribly uncomfortable, I'll just tell you from my perspective, is we had to limit visitors to the hospital. If you have a loved one that's in the hospital and we're limiting your ability to see them, that is uncomfortable in many, many ways. And I just want to apologize for that. That was certainly not, it's not intentional, but to protect everybody, that's what we had to do. So if you think about having 100 patients in the hospital with COVID-19, you've got to limit access. And so we did do that. Fortunately, we're at a point where we are relaxing some of those policies, and we're letting our visitors back in slowly. Next slide, please. So this is a question that we're asked early on. Well, how many ventilators do you have? Are you going to have enough ventilators? You know, when this first broke out and we heard what was going on in New York, that was the thing you would hear. Well, they just didn't have enough. We never have been even challenged about the number of ventilators. We have 80 at our facility. Actually, we had just purchased in February, right before the outbreak, we had just purchased 20 new ones. It was about $1 million, so they're not inexpensive. But fortunately, we were in a great position, and we've never been challenged at all. Next slide. Here's another change, and this had been in the works for a couple of years, really, and so we just started. And these are physicians, intensivists. These are physicians that are in the hospital 24/7 that care for our sickest patients in the intensive care units. And so we started this in the midst of what I've been describing to you. We have these new physicians that have moved to our community that are delivering the care in our intensive care units. Next slide. A couple other changes. So if you've been in one of our facilities or another facility, you've probably seen one of these two things. Again, these are some of the changes and adaptations that have come as a result of COVID-19. So you'll see one side of the picture where it looks like we've cut a hole in the door. It's exactly what we did. We wanted our nurses to be able to see in the room without opening the door, for obvious reasons, as you can see, because of the spread of the infections. And so we cut holes in doors and put plexiglass in there so our nurses could visualize. The other thing we had to do, and you'll see on the other side of this, is we had to figure out a way to have the ventilation system to ventilate out versus in. That's called a negative pressure room. If you hear that term, that's what that really entails. And so it basically has to do with the air flow in those rooms. And so we converted 80 of our rooms thinking we were going to have that early on, we would have that many. And so a couple of times we ran right up to that number. Here's something else that happened. I never would have thought this. But we had an auditorium where we would have functions like we're in today, where we could seat probably 100 people or so. And it was adjacent, close to our emergency department. And when this all broke out, we said, we're going to need more beds. We're going to need to have the ability to triage people differently than the way we do it today. And so we converted that auditorium into a 12-bed observation unit pretty quickly. And that's what you see here where these three staff members are standing. Is it went from a 100-seat auditorium to a 12-bed observation unit that helped us really move these patients along. Because many of the patients we were having symptoms, but they really didn't need to be admitted. So these were pretty short stays, and we were able to get them what they needed and move them on. So that's sort of a snapshot of our year 2020. I didn't talk about the flood that we had in the hospital. I didn't talk about the bomb threat, and I didn't talk about some of the other things that happened. But those are some other things that happened. So you never know what life is going to pitch you on any particular day, in this case, in a year. What I will say is adversity changes us, but we have a choice to make. Are we going to react to it positively, or are we going to just kind of hang our head and kind of walk away? And so I want to leave you with three things that hopefully will tie together really what I've been talking about. If you go to the next one. So I have three quotes. Hopefully these are people that you know. John Maxwell is an author. Most people have heard of him. He says change is inevitable. Growth is optional. So heard some of that conversation this morning. So we had a lot of change come our way. Next slide. Next quote is by a gentleman who was the president of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, and he's talking about education. We talked about that. I heard a gentleman before me talk about educating others. And so what did we learn in this whole process that I just described? We had some things that we had to learn. We had to do differently. And so Nelson Mandela said, education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. The last quote that I have there is from the 35th President of the United States, John Kennedy, said, change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future. So we can't just get absorbed with what's going on, what just happened, or what's going on right now, but we've got to look down the road. And so We have tried very hard to do that. We're certainly not perfect, but we've done our very best to take care of our community and the people that we serve. So back to the neckties. So you're probably wondering, where in the heck did that come from? Well, several of us have them on. And so does anybody know what the origin of a necktie is? Don't you answer the question, but I think you know. It was really protection, and it also helped the coat. It was used to tie the coat up, so it was a functional part of the attire. It wasn't intended to be ornate like those ties are. Go to the next slide. So I'm going to get you to think about a parallel. So when we all came in here today, most of us had masks on. Well, this is how our masks started out. They were blue and green. Those are surgical masks. And go to the next one. Could it be that the mask stays with us like a tie, and it becomes part of our wardrobe or part of what we have on every day, just like glasses or a tie? And so I don't know the answer to that. As I said earlier, there's a lot of questions about COVID-19 I don't know the answer to, but I do know that this is going to be with us for a while. And so I'll leave you with that. Are there questions?
Okay, and the floor is open for questions, so if you have any, please put them in the chat and we will ask Bryan for you. Okay, we have a question from Shelby. What has Mr. Kindred relied on to get him through the tough times?
Well, my faith, particularly so, because as I started this, actually I didn't tell you that whole story. I lost both of my parents within a 6-month period of time, and so I would say my faith. The other thing, just at work daily, this is just a leadership principle. You got to have the right people around you. You got to hire the right people, and thank goodness I do have those people around me. So I would say those two things. And obviously our staff can't do what we do, certainly, without having the right people, the quality people, the best that you can find. And so that's what I rely on. But personally, it's my faith, my family means a lot to me.
Okay, and building off of that question, how do you encourage your staff, your team, and those around you to keep up morale?
You know, I make rounds. Actually, I did it this week, and we asked a similar question to our staff. Well, are there people that need to be recognized? And we encourage them to talk to each other. And as simple as, I was in a group earlier this week up on a nursing floor. Actually, it was on our COVID unit. And we were talking to primarily staff clinicians. I said, is there anybody that needs to be recognized? And this nurse said, I want to recognize this. And she called her by name. She's one of our environmental services workers. And she said, she's the best. And she was encouraging her. When she started talking, and we were all in there obviously with masks on, you could see the tears rolling down her face. And so that's what I try to do, is encourage our staff to talk to each other. It's a team. This is a team sport, and that's what we do. We encourage our staff, and we got to have the best.
Hey, Bryan.
Yeah.
Obviously, y'all are working in a different environment than the rest of us are, and I don't think any of us can fully appreciate the the challenges that y'all had to work through at the hospital. But talk about how do you keep a team together? How do you lead? How do you counsel members of your team when they are literally putting themselves in harm's way? I mean, they're taking on some personal risk to their own health potentially, and somebody maybe back home. I'd love to just kind of understand a little bit more about that element of what y'all have been dealing with.
Well, one of the things that we say to our staff often is you're working in a place where most, if not all, the people are there because it's a calling. It's not just a job. And so those are the people we're looking for when we're interviewing. We're looking for people who see what we do as a calling. And I would say most of the time we get the right people, but if we don't have the right people on the bus, we need to get those people somewhere else where they can be productive. But that's one thing. The other thing I would say, I had a conversation with some of my staff this morning, and it starts with me and everybody in our organization. You got to set the right example. This is what we were talking about. If it's important to wear a mask in our hospital and wear it properly, you know who needs to do it right first? Me. If I'm walking around in the hospital and I don't have my mask put on in the right fashion and I've got it hanging below my nose, I have no right to tell the staff to do it that way. So it starts with me, but it's emulating the appropriate way to do things. It's pretty simple. And so that's what I encourage my staff to do. And but again, it starts with me.
Okay, and thank you for your time today. We truly enjoyed having you.
Thank you.